Hey everyone, so in this video we are going to be looking over the answers to our study guide for our tables and equations quiz. So before we begin, the three little screenshots at the top just give you a little summary of what we covered. So the first one is your overview of tables, the middle one is your overview of equations, and the one on the right is how you can use equations to solve for different values. So we are going to start right off with number one, which talks about a gas record for a certain car. So they tell you that miles driven is proportional to the number of gallons of gas used, right? Which makes sense. There's a relationship, right? A car will get a certain level of efficiency based on how much gas they use to go a certain amount of miles. So what we need to do is investigate our table first. So on the left, we have gallons of gas. So maybe we'll call that with the variable G. And miles driven, maybe we'll use an M for that one. Okay? I will also include up top, just as a little reminder, the left column is always considered your X column, and the right is always considered your Y column, which we're going to need in a second. So question part A asks us to find the constant of proportionality, again, which is this special multiplier that gets us from gallons of gas to the number of miles. Hopefully you remember from our lessons that we can either try to guess and check, or we can use this shortcut, y divided by x, right? So if you take any number in the right column and divide it by the number in the left column that goes with it, you'll get your constant of proportionality. So why don't we do that? I'll write it out for just one of the rows. So we're going to take for the first row our y number, which was 112.5, and we are going to divide by the x number, which was 5 gallons. And you'll see that that results in 22.5, which is our multiplier. So I can put that over with the arrow. And again, you can double check, but all three of these should become 22.5. So to answer part A, K equals 22.5. That is our constant of proportionality. Oops. Okay. Part B asks us to write an equation to represent the relationship between gallons of gas and number of miles. So again, we said whenever we write an equation, we should always start with the general form, which is y equals kx. Okay, and then we're going to swap out the variables and the constant of proportionality to write our final equation. So instead of using a y, if we scroll back up to our table, we remember that we were supposed to use m to represent miles. So we're going to start with m equals the k number, our constant of proportionality, we found was 22.5. And then again, instead of using an x, if we refer back to our table, the x column, we were supposed to use G for gallons of gas. So our equation would be m equals 22.5 G. In other words, the amount of miles we can drive is 22.5 times the amount of gallons that we have. So again, we can use this equation to answer a couple of questions. So for instance, if they ask us, well, how many miles can we drive on 9 gallons of gas, right? 9 gallons of gas, we're going to reuse our equation and make a substitution. We're going to rewrite it, but instead of putting the variable G, we're going to swap out a 9. I'm going to switch this because it looks a little bit like the same thing. First one is a G, down here it's a 9, right? All you have to do is do 22.5 times 9, and you'll see that you would be able to go about 202.5 miles on that amount of gas. Going the other way, part D, how many gallons of gas would be needed if you wanted to drive 60 miles? So again, we're going to start with our equation. M equals 22.5 G. And if we're talking about 60 miles, we're going to need to swap that out for M. So instead of writing M, I'm going to replace that with a 60, because M is amount of miles. 60 equals 22.5 G. And again, we have to figure out what this G value is. right? So in other words, 22.5 times some number will equal 60. So you have to figure out what number needs to go in for G in order to make this true. Maybe you can think about it this way. Well, if you divide out 22.5 from both sides of the equation, you'll be able to solve for this. So it actually comes out to be a decimal, and I'm just going to write the answer up on the line here for us. We would need about 2.667 gallons of gas in order to drive 60 miles. So again, I hope this example helped you see how you could take a table, find the constant of proportionality, write your equation, and then use the equation to solve some questions. All right, moving on to number 2. So Mr. Shea is in the gym running on the treadmill. The equation below represents the relationship between the number of minutes he spends running, or M, and the number of calories he burns. Question A wants us to find the constant of proportionality. So again, I'm just going to rewrite up top the general form for our equations, always where y equals kx, right? And again, sometimes we swapped out, instead of y and x, in this case we were using c and m. However, we just need to be able to find this k number, which in this case would just be 12. So you want to make sure if you are given an equation, you can find that constant of proportionality. Part B asks us, what does this mean in the context of the situation? Again, if they ask you about context, they're usually talking about explaining the unit rate, which again is the exact same thing as the constant of proportionality. Again, if he's comparing the amount of minutes he can run and the number of calories he burns, okay, we're going to say that he can burn 12 calories per minute. I'm going to abbreviate here a little bit. So he burns 12 calories per minute. That is your unit rate. Or in other words, that is your constant of proportionality in the context of the situation. So that is how you would answer question number 2. Lastly, we have part C. How many calories does Mr. Shea burn after running 15 minutes? So once again, we're going to use our equation. Calories equals 12 times the number of minutes. We know that he's going to be running for 15 minutes, so we're going to put a 15 in for M. So, this should stay at 12. And instead of M, we're going to replace that with a 15. All right. And then 12 times 15 should give us 180. So Mr. Shea could burn 180 calories in that amount of time. Question 3, our final question on our study guide. Is y proportional to x in the table below? Okay, if it is, please use an equation to write the relationship. If not, show or explain why not. So again, when we were asked to find if it was proportional or not, we said we needed to find all of our constant of proportionalities, right? Well, find all the multiplier numbers, right? Calculate these arrows and double check that they all became the same answer. So let's do that. I'm just going to go on the side, and I'm going to use the y divided by x method instead of guessing and checking. So for the first row, we need to divide y, which is 6, divided by x, which is 10, and that should give us an answer of 0.6. If we do for the second row, 9 divided by 15, that also gives us 0.6, so we're good so far. Lastly, 12.6 divided by 21, look at that, also 0.6. So we can put all these numbers in as our multipliers. They're all 0.6. And because these all became the same answer, you know it is proportional. So we're going to give it like a green check mark and say proportional, meaning whatever x and y are, there is a special relationship between them, right? There is a connection. Lastly, they want us to write an equation to represent this relationship. So again, We know the form is always y equals kx. We need to double check, are we supposed to be using x's and y's? We are, so we're good. The only thing that we're going to need to plug in is that k value, which again you found was 0.6. So our final equation for this, y equals 0.6 x would be your answer. I'm going to also write it as a fraction form. Y equals 6/10 would also work. And actually, for that matter, y equals 3/5 x would work as well if you simplified this fraction. Okay, so this last example, again, if they ask you to decide is it proportional or not, you need to do this these following steps. All right, so thank you for watching. I hope this helped. And please let me know if you have any additional questions before our quiz on tables and equations.